Good evening, everyone. It's evening time where I am. I don't know what it is for you as you're watching this, but really, what is time right now, anyways. I do want to welcome you. My name is Lorelai Batislong. I am the Deputy Director of Decolonizing the Music Room. We are a nonprofit organization using research, training, and discourse to help music educators develop critical practices. We center BBIA Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian voices, knowledge, and experiences in order to challenge the historical dominance of Western European and white American music, narrative, and practices. We're here today in honor of Filipino-American History Month, which was established in 1992. Filipino-Americans make up the second largest Asian American group in the nation and the third largest ethnic group in California, where two of our panelists reside. I think, Kassey, you're not in California, are you? No, okay, I didn't think so. But you're on the Pacific Coast, right?
Yeah.
Okay. October is noted as the first record of Filipinos in the United States, and October 18th, 1587, so for 433 years, brought over to the United States by the Spanish. With me today are three wonderful educators and humans, and I'm just going to let them introduce themselves.
Yeah. I'm Tiffany Unarce Barry. I live in California. Let's see, I'm a violinist and a singer, and I got all of my degrees at San Jose State University. So not what's ideal for most people, but because of family and because of finances, that it ended up being the best thing for me, and I'm glad of it because I feel really tied to the South Bay in that way. I taught for 14 years in the public school system in San Jose, and in California, you have to teach everything. So you're teaching orchestra and band and choir and general music and ukulele, and so I have lots of experience in those various areas of music. And then right now, I'm teaching at San Jose State as I'm an advisor for graduate students, and I also run the Orff Schulwerk levels courses that started there in 2019, and then I also help administer the summer master's program at San Jose State as well. And I am a second generation Filipina. My parents and my older brother came to the United States in 1973. And so I consider them first generation. And then I was born in the United States. I first lived in Michigan and then moved to California when I was I think 5 or 6. And then we've sort of lived in various parts of California, like Hayward, and then San Jose. Most of my life in San Jose. So
Great. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Kassey. I've been teaching for about 5 years now in the Seattle, Washington area, mainly South Seattle. And I make that distinction very clear because there's a huge disparity of like a lot of folks of color or BBIA folks in like South Seattle area versus North Seattle, which is like predominantly white, right? I've taught it all. I've taught K through 6 general music. I've taught middle school choir. I've taught high school choir. And right now I'm teaching middle school choir in a school in this area. So
Nice.
yeah.
Great.
I am consider myself also second generation, although I thought first generation was the label at first. But it technically would be second generation because my mom came here in the 80s, and then she had me like in the 90s or something like that. So yeah.
My name is Czarina Jimenez. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am in Southern California. I live and teach in the unceded lands of the Tongva, Serrano, Quiche, and Coahuila peoples, which is the Inland Empire, like San Bernardino area, in a town called Loma Linda, and it's a blue zone. And I currently am in my 8th year of teaching, but in my first year of teaching second grade classroom. My program got COVID cut that phase. But prior to that, I taught elementary general classroom music, so TK through 4th grade, and then 5th and 6th grade choir. And now I'm in the classroom with second graders But I snuck in ukulele, so we're doing that too. I was like, no, my class is gonna get ukulele. Y'all.
Are you like straight up teaching them? Are you teaching them like how to play? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. We haven't started yet. We just did like all the intro stuff, but I'm gonna go back to my music classroom and I'm just gonna like take all the ukuleles and bring it to my second grade classroom.
Nice, I like it. So am I right in thinking, Kassey and Czarina, you're both vocalists then? Are you both singers?
Trainers? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. That was my training through through college. I, for some reason, was more nervous playing the piano than I am singing, even though I was trained in piano like for forever and not really trained in voice until college. But anyways, and yeah, same thing. My mom came here in the I think in the 80s. She was in her teens. So then I was born here. I grew up in Los Angeles.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, same deal too. And I had the same question too, because I would see it I saw it like identified very different ways. Like sometimes I would see second generation, like your parents came over, they were born there, but then they came over and you were born here. But then I'd also always heard it as first generation. But I think it's like first generation born here probably is the distinction.
Yeah.
But there's something about that I find prideful when I say I'm first generation, that I like to
Me too.
kind of like make that distinction. I'm like, no, actually, I'm first generation. So, I don't know where that comes from. But then
I think it's like a sense of rootedness too. It's like this designation that like, hold up, like, no, my parents made the trip, like, so
yeah, definitely. So yeah, I am actually a French horn player. That was what I was trained in at college, in my classical training or whatever, the traditional training. But I don't ever play that with my students. When I was teaching, I taught for 14 years in Texas. So I'm in Texas, 10 years in San Antonio, 4 years in Austin. And then for the last 5 years, I've been back at school. So I'm at UT Austin right now working on my PhD. And I hooked up with Brandy and we started this organization, and now we're just kind of a resource for teachers. So hopefully this will be something that teachers can watch and at least get a different perspective, get different ideas from voices that typically we don't get to amplify, and we want to make sure that we amplify these voices. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk to us before we do any more, like just kind of getting deep into it. I wanted to kind of figure out how we wanted to talk about our Filipino identity during this panel. I'm pretty loose and but at the point that I don't want to be flippant about anything. So, I mean, does the Filipino-ness sound like it's disrespectful in any way? Because I talk about American-ness and I don't know, and I'm like stuck between the two things, and they're very different from each other sometimes, So I don't know what your feelings are on that kind of terminology.
Totally chill.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Whatever you want.
All right. Awesome. I think maybe what we'll start about, with DTMR or with any kind of cultural study, and when we speak about identity, we often have to use broad terms. Like we at DTMR have adopted BBIA, Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian. We speak about Asian Americans, we speak about Filipino American, because we need to be able to maneuver through discussions in kind of an unencumbered way. But we also know that it kind of like takes a lot of the nuance out and what's personal and individual about that identity. For instance, like we recently at DTMR just widened that terminology. It used to be BBIP, Black, Brown, Indigenous People. After having a discussion with other Asian and Asian Americans in the group about BBIP, like for me, I don't know if it's the same for you. I think it's rooted in having my Filipino culture and identity. It was super easy for me to say I'm part of Brown, like I can identify in Brown, but it didn't click with me that other Asians didn't have that same kind of relationship with that word. So I was just wondering, do you guys have any thoughts on that? The census just came out and there's the Asian Pacific Islander, like there's that discussion. My dad just talked about that and he didn't know what to do. Something, because he's like, geographically, I don't know what to do, so any thoughts?
I have some thoughts on that. So sure. My I didn't hear Pacific Islander until I was in high school, and my high school Filipino club was called PISA, which was a Pacific Islander Student Association. And that was the first time that I heard, and I went to a high school that had hell of Filipinos. And so when I was in that organization, there were Tongans, there were Hawaiians, and then like a bunch of Filipinos too. And we learned like the different dances within, you know, that region, like in Oceania, and the Philippines sort of like is part of that, like, you know, geographically too, like the peoples are very similar. And I know that I've spoken to other Filipinos who are from the Philippines, and they identify as Asians, but then you talk to Filipinos here in the United States or in other parts of the country or of the world, and a lot of them identify as Pacific Islander too. And so they're not, I mean, either one is not, they're not wrong. They're just like the way a person identifies. And geographically, like we're closer to Asia, but like a lot of the nuances in our culture and in our language and, you know, our traditions and heritage, like are very similar to the Pacific Islands too. So we're just sort of like right in the middle. And I know that when I've filled out forms, I oftentimes like, I'm not sure either. I'm like, I think I'm Asian, and then I think but I feel like I'm more Pacific Islander, but I don't feel like I don't know if I should. But then when I see Filipino, I'm like, yes. Filipino on there, thank God. And you don't see it that often. And my daughter, my kids are half white, so I married a white guy. And our three kids, like, you know, I asked my daughter, who's 15, turning 16 later on this month, and she is, you know, she said that she doesn't know what to choose sometimes because I said, did they give you options? Can you choose white and Filipino? She said sometimes, and sometimes I don't. And then I just choose Asian because like I can't. You know, there's no Filipino, so
right.
I watched when you had that video like of the explanation of like BBIP to BBIA, I actually like thought about that for a while. I was like, like I've always identified as Asian this whole time, but I think it's also a regional thing too, just because like in the Pacific Northwest, like, and also like my family in general, we're pretty like light skinned, right? Like, and we can get into colorism later, but like, yeah, right.
We will. It's on the list.
It's on the good, great. But like, yeah. So I was always surrounded, like, especially here, there's like a lot of like East Asian folks here in Washington, right? So I always was more culturally associated with that. But then I don't know, like, but then my cousins are a lot darker than I am, right? So like there's that kind of like, they would identify as brown right away and I wouldn't. It's just like, but then I also can, but I also it was really confusing to like figure out. Yeah, it's like, you know, like what you said, Tiffany, like it's really hard to figure out like what waters do I tread in here? Like,
I think this is really interesting now to bring in the idea of multiple axes of diversity. This is something that Dr. Lisa García Bedolla has spoken about. It's the idea that not only are there just your race and your ethnic identity, but there are also different aspects of that are working and intersecting that help form that identity that you have. So in instance, she says there's 4 different ones. There's the national origin, so what country and also region of the country you identify, your generational aspect, so how long have you been in the United States? Have you been here recently, or are you multiple generations in? That also plays into our identity. Nativity, are you a citizen, or are you not a citizen? And then geography, which is I think what we're speaking about right here. So although Kassey and I are both Filipinos, he experiences being a Filipino very differently because he's in a different part of the United States, where I have experienced it here in Austin and in San Antonio in Texas. Our experiences are much different. It's different because of the levels of activism that happens within the community, my just not having any kind of representation around me as well, the levels of political activism, our relationships with other communities within our own, those are all very different and also feeds into our identity and our relationship with being Filipino. There was a point where it would be like, what do you want me to be? And I'll be that.
Oh and, my gosh,
it's like,
yeah.
It's going to be, what's the best for me? And then I'll do that.
In this situation, like, what should I be?
Yeah.
The Asian, Pacific Islander,
Yeah.
And honestly, like, I feel like that it's weird because I've always considered that just the way that, and I mean I'm going to say it sucks because it is something that has been born out of colonization. But the Filipinos' ability to adapt very quickly to whatever culture it is like within context with. And if you think about it, it is because like where we're located, it really is. It's like great winds, like everything, like connection of waters, like everything was just going and flowing through, flowing through our islands on top of colonization and imperialism from various sources.
The colonization of the Philippines began in 1565 by the Spanish. King Philip was the king of Spain, and that's how the Philippines got its name, King Philip, the Philippines. So that colonization lasted from 1565 until 1898. At that time, the Spanish-American War was fought, and the Spanish lost and had to give the Philippines over to the United States. So then what began as a Spanish colony now became an American colony. It remained an American colony until the end of World War II. So at the tail end of the colonization, American colonization, there was also a Japanese occupancy too as well. And then the Philippines was granted their independence in 1946.
And so it really has, it's been a matter of survival, like the way a Filipino can really just adapt to whatever the majority culture is and fit in and find a way to fit in. Oh, you're brown? Like growing up, I grew up in LA, so you're brown, I'm brown. Like growing up surrounded by like Latinx culture, like for me, like I see there my connection because of being colonized by Spain. Like it's terrible. My husband and I will have, we would argue because he's Mexican, and we'll just have like a joke. We'll be like, who was colonized for longer? Well, we got the language. Oh, we killed, like, we'll just like go back and forth like jokingly because it's like a shared history of our people is that piece of colonization. But then also, being in Hawaii and then also feeling that connection there and like that solidarity there with people who are Pacific Islander, and knowing that we do have shared roots, but over time there has been a difference too. When I think of just, for example, like marginalization in terms of representation in media, like we have Asians and we have like Filipinos and then like Pacific Islander. Oh, now we have Moana, like things like that. Like, and so it's
like
it really is
of things.
Yeah, it is so varied. And it's just, it's something that's a strength that I see in being Filipino, but then also something that is just like, ooh.
Right.
We have a lot. We have a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff.
So much stuff.
Yeah. Identity crisis is exactly like how I feel right now. Like I'm just trying to parse out things. Like, if you follow me on Facebook or wherever, then you know that I am like really into like understanding my Filipino culture and my relationship to it.
Yep.
And going in a deep dive on that kind of stuff. But it's just like growing up, I didn't have like. Tiffany, the fact that you had a Filipino like club, I'm like, what is that about? Because I was literally, it's just me and my brother were the only Filipinos, and we were like maybe 3 other Asians in my school, and so like it was like I need to find a group and I need to be a part of that group. Like I don't think I was actively thinking that, but that was just like your teenage mind. There was I didn't have any kind of models to follow except for my parents, and my parents were all about assimilate as fast as you can, because they came over in the 70s in that very typical way. I almost think it's almost kind of policy driven. My mom was a nurse, and so she came over as a nurse. My dad was in the United States Navy, in the Navy, and they came over, and it was like, you become American as fast as you can, right? They didn't teach me the language. I even had a conversation with them. I was like, why didn't you teach me Tagalog growing up? I would have loved to have been able to speak to you in Tagalog and understand it. And they were like, why would we do that? You speak English in school. That's just one more thing that they would say you're different and make fun of you for. So, and I don't blame them for that. I mean, that's just how that's what people thought back then, so for better or worse. Yeah, so you know, having no representation, but now you are all teachers. Do you see anything about your Filipino identity that you bring into your teaching, maybe on purpose or like just by existing?
Yeah, I mean, even today with my very first class, literally one of the first questions one of my students asked, "Are you Filipino?" I said, "Yeah, yeah, I'm Filipino." And they're like, "Oh my God, a Filipino teacher! What? Oh my God, they exist!" Yeah, we exist. We've been existing for a long time.
Was the student like Filipino too, or
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah. No,
So
no, it wasn't like a no. I'm pretty sure they were. Although I never got to see their face because you know they don't want to be on camera.
Oh, that's right. It's
Yeah.
online. That's so crazy.
Yeah, but like but clearly they were, because like they were like, "Oh my gosh, do you speak Ilocano? Do you speak Tagalog? Do you speak all these things?" I'm like, "No, I don't know any of this." I like you, Lorelai. I wasn't taught any of that. Like, my mom's excuses was that, "Oh, your grandma and grandpa never like spoke it." And I'm like, "That's a lie. They never even speak English." Like, what? They I don't know what they were trying to say, but what my mom was trying to say with that. But maybe it was like rooted in like Czarina, your experience of like, we got to become American really, really fast, or you know, like. Or yeah, and so I was just like, I mean, I think it's really important to bring it out, you know, like I just, especially because like, I mean, as someone going back to the Asian conversation, that like, you know, people assumed I'm Vietnamese, people assume I'm like Japanese or Chinese, like even though I don't even know why, like people don't even look like that. Like, I mean, I don't even know if like why they would think that, you know, like I've always seen myself as Filipino, and like what would you all say, like this identities get like put onto us, and it's just like, okay, well I guess I'm that now, or I guess I'm this, or whatever you say I am, and this is what I am. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's
yeah. I mean, there's like this element too of like and I've had to kind of dissect this in my own kind of like just psychological kind of understanding of things, but the centering of whiteness is something that I've just been trying to kind of like figure out and interrogate in my own like approach to being, and how quickly I can I center whiteness, and then you get this false sense of security, and then you realize that security is based on other people and is always, you know, available to be taken away, and it's not your choice, right? So it's like this weird kind of like an uncertain kind of ground I stand on every once in a while when I look around and I say, oh, you know, like it's so much more obvious now to me, like what space I'm in. And then that like automatically kind of dictates how now I will be for the rest of the conversation or the rest of the interaction with people. So I don't know if you, Czarina or Tiffany, I don't want to go on. Did you guys have anything to say about like the teaching and how that you bringing in your Filipino identity affects your students or your teaching?
Well, I was going to mention about like my experience as a student. In California, there's a lot of Filipinos, but like when we first moved to California, the area where we moved to in Hayward, there weren't a lot. And my family moved around a lot. My mom was a nurse, and then my dad, you know, had different businesses over the years, but when we moved to San Jose, then that's when we were suddenly in a community where there was a lot of Filipinos. And so I felt like, you know, there was a presence, like there was a presence of Filipino-ness like in that area. But then you go to like North San Jose, there's not that many Filipinos. And that's where I ended up teaching in public school. And I maybe saw like pockets of Filipino students, and then I was one of 2 Filipino teachers. Prior to that, when I went to San Jose State, that was kind of a culture shock for me too, because I came from a high school where there was like a Filipino club, there was like, you know, a Black student union club, and like there was just lots of diversity. But at San Jose State in the music program, when you're studying Western European classical music, I was one of 2, maybe 3 Filipinos. And I remember like seeing them, and I'm friends with them now, but I remember seeing them and being like, oh my God, yay, there's a Filipino. And then, but they were not as friendly to me. And it was sort of like, oh, who's this Filipino girl? I'm like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna be quiet now.
Yeah, no, that's a thing.
Yeah, and it was very, I don't know, it was, and we ended up becoming friends, but it was sort of just like, and I think over time too, when I found myself as like the only Filipina, like in a space where there's a lot of white people, I'm like, Am I the token person of color? I guess I am. And then like there's another Filipino like, oh wait, should I talk to her? You know, like I'm not sure. Like should we it's really interesting, like as you enter these spaces like with the different, you know, populations. It's just like you're trying to like again trying to adapt to the environment, which we're pretty good at, but it's also it's very taxing and exhausting to have to go through every time. So
yeah, definitely. You know, it's interesting what you said, because I've noticed there's people who are like, oh, another Filipina, you know, like I will attach myself to you, and I want to know you, you're my friend now. And then there's points where there might be only two others in the group, and you're like, you only have so much the pie, and you don't want to give, like, I want my piece of pie.
Yeah.
If you are there, then you're going to take some of my pie, kind of thing. Like you're almost my competition, it's right?
That competition that we keep, and you know, it exists in the Philippines too. I mean, like you know, you hear the chismes and like from the parents and stuff, but and I think that is a product of like our colonial mentality, just like you know, having our identity stripped, you know, for centuries, and then needing to find something to feel valuable, like, or feel like a sense of value, like within ourselves. And like, what is it? Okay, Catholicism, being as religious and as possible, having the right career, you know, being a nurse or being a doctor or an accountant, like those are the only jobs you're allowed to have if you're Filipino. And you know, just like you needing to attach yourself to these ways of feeling worthy, feeling like you're valuable. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, you know, Czarina, was there anything else you wanted to add about like your identity, teaching, interacting with your students?
So the school I currently teach at, it's actually it's very similar to the school that I grew up at. Not the same, two different schools. But where within the school that I grew up, the majority, I feel like a core group was actually Filipino. And so I grew up being like always having Filipinos around me, and like seeing other Filipinos, both like peers and then like older like generation. And so it's interesting to me being at the school where I am now, because there also is like I don't feel like it's as big of a core group as the school I grew up at, but where I currently teach, there's a pretty solid amount like of Filipino students and Filipino families, and it's I can tell that I'm getting like I tell I'm getting older in my teaching, because I feel like I'm transitioning. Like when I first started teaching, I was like awesome mode, like big sister teacher for like my students who are like my 5th and 6th grade students. Now they're like in high school, and like, you know, they'll like I'll check in on them, like, how are you doing? And things like that. And I feel like now I'm starting to like transition from like author mode to like tita in my teaching, like all because like age group wise, like I'm like the auntie now. Like I'm cool, but like not as cool.
But you still feel like you are.
I feel like I'm going, yeah, exactly. I feel like I'm going through like the phases of like first like but it's really sweet, because I see it too in the ways that I interact with parents, because I have like a lot of my students, and it's crazy because I really do like relate to them, because I see them and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're like me, like your parents moved here and you were born here. And it's really sweet because I'll see their parents and they'll be like, oh, hi teacher, and I'll be like, oh, hi auntie, like I don't know their names. I call all of my Filipino students' parents auntie and uncle, like and like talking with, you know, and talking with other teachers who aren't Filipino, they'll say things like, oh, you know, like I don't like it when parent, like why can't parents just call me my name? Why can't they say like Miss whatever? Why do they say teacher? And for me, like hearing my Filipino like parents call me teacher is such like, it gives me such like a warm feeling, because I know that they're saying it out of like endearment, and like so I just like eat it up. So things like that, it's really precious for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that because it feels like it's still kind of relating and holding on to something that is Filipino, you know, like to understand those terms of endearment and to embrace them is and to hold them and to center them is like saying, here's my Filipino-ness right here, you know, and I think that's important. I know growing up for me in school, my earliest recollection of understanding that I was different or othered was when I was in kindergarten, and my younger brother was waiting for me after school. I was walking out of my class, and he goes, "Ati, Ati," and like he calls me Ati, right? And I just remember being completely embarrassed and just turning white and just wanting to run into the car and hide because he called me this word that was a foreign word, and everybody was like, what does that mean? And I was like, how does that happen to a 5-year-old that they understand that was something you could be ashamed of, right? And so when I think about those things and how much that has just been internalized as I was growing up, where I was just kind of trying to not be a Filipino, try to be as white as possible as I could be, now having to like kind of reckon with that, and now just feeling like this huge amount of shame of that being attached to that, and like at its worst it's like self-loathing, and I just can't believe that I had ever thought that way, and it felt like disrespectful to my parents, and like every time I talk to them, it's like I'm trying to make up for that, you know. It's like all this kind of weird, it's all in my head, like nobody will ever see me dealing with that but it's in my head, and it affects the way I like interact with people and how I present myself now. So it just makes me worried for younger students like myself who are going through the same kinds of things, trying to figure out their identity and be okay with themselves growing up, and maybe not being able to to think about it and say these things about it, but it's going to happen if they ever get there, you know, in their 20s. So
yeah, I think I had the same thing. Like my younger sister would call me ate, and then you know we called my older brother kuya, and but it depended on the spaces. Like when we I mean, and we were in an area when we moved to San Jose, we were in an area where there were a lot of Filipinos. So like, you know, there are other kids who are saying ate and kuya, or they're talking about their family, or like my tita, and like, you know, oh, you have a tito bong? I have a tito bong, you know. It's just like there's you know, the language was being spoken at school, but then you go someplace else, and then I remember my older brother, I don't remember where, but he was like, don't call me that, like here or something. And I don't remember where it was. It might have been when it was at his high school, but there were hella Filipinos there too. But I just remember thinking, oh, okay, I'm not supposed to say that here. I'm not sure why, but I'm gonna listen. So yeah, it's just sort of the different, you know, the different, again, the spaces like we're in, like, oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to be myself or use those words here. So. Right.
Yeah. Kassey, this is just like for my own like understanding and my own curiosity. So you don't speak Tagalog or okay, so neither do I. But can you listen to your parents talk and understand what they're saying?
No.
Oh, I can.
This is another thing too, like, oh yeah, I know, it's okay. Like, I'm like the only one in my family who like who cannot listen to, or who can't listen and understand what's going on like in the household, right? Like my cousins can, because I guess you know, they have folks who speak it all the time, but like growing up with my mom and only my mom, like she's a single mom, and you know, the only speaking in Tagalog that she did was like with people over the phone, and that wasn't that often, you know, like, and so I never really got a chance to try to pick up the language and try to understand. And it's interesting now trying to actively pursue it, you know, either through like learning about like music styles like kundiman and stuff, or just like even turning my phone. I turned my phone to like in Tagalog, like, you know how you can like flip it into like Tagalog or something. I like most of the notifications are in Tagalog now, which is like really confusing because I have to look up everything.
Where am I supposed to be? Dialects. A dialect is a form of a language which is specific to a region or a specific social group within that country. So a cursory glance shows that there are upwards of 187 different dialects in the Philippines. That number fluctuates because in some cases dialects have dialects depending on what region you're in. So I've seen 187 different dialects. I've also seen that there's about 8 that are considered the major dialects of the Philippines, but it is Tagalog that is the language that is taught along with English in schools.
There was this like web series called Game Boys. It's based in the Philippines, and it's these two guys like trying to develop this romance online, and it's all in Tagalog, right? But there were English subtitles, and it was just interesting, like listening. Like sometimes I didn't have to read the subtitle, and I was like, oh, I know what that means. And I would watch it with some of my other friends who don't speak Tagalog, and like there were things I got inherently, like I didn't know that I actually would get until I heard it, you know? So sometimes it's like, yeah, I get it, and then other times I'm like, I don't understand what you're saying at all. Like,
right. Yeah. I don't know if it's because like I had my parents would talk to each other all the time. So I think maybe having 2 people talk, you could also get some body language and some kind of connotation and figure out understanding that way. Yeah. But they never spoke to us and they never taught us that. Czarina, you didn't grow up speaking the language either?
No, I did not grow up speaking the language. I can understand it. Especially, I call it house Filipino. I can understand house Filipino really well. I can speak house Filipino really well too.
What is it like?
What's house Filipino? House Filipino is like all the ways to tell someone to come eat, all the ways to tell someone to clean up after themselves, all the ways to talk to a kid when they're in trouble. Exactly. Like, all of that. We're good.
That's
my class
amazing.
When I'm that is like when I'm conducting, like that's I'll just be, and like they know,
with
like
your lips.
I'll do like the eyebrow, the head tilt. Like I've watched myself conducting, and I'm just like, ooh. That's just
nonverbal gestures, though. You know,
nonverbal, all of it.
Nonverbal gestures.
All of it. Yeah, all of my students, like the whole school, they know it. I'll speak, and they'll know, like I do it, and I point too. I'll be like, "What are you doing?" Like, what? It's interesting because if I have kids, they're gonna be
it comes out.
They're gonna be Filipino. They're gonna be biracial. They'll be Filipino and Mexican.
Yeah.
My husband is fluent in Spanish because his parents taught him. That was his first language, and so we'll see. If I can have babies who are fluent in Spanish and can speak house Filipino, I will be very proud.
It's gonna happen. Yeah, no, I remember when my oldest was in preschool, and I would pick her up and like I would go, psst. And then she's the only one. She's like the only half Filipino, half white, and then she's like a bunch of 3-year-olds, and then she's the one who's like turning around, like, oh, mommy.
Yeah.
So it's gonna come out, and like in way, like I think I posted about it on Facebook, but like I told my kids, like, open the light, like turn it on, like
close the light and open the light. Close the light.
Turn off the door over there.
Right, yeah, over there, right. So my sister-in-law is teaching me how to speak Tagalog now, and it's been such an amazing experience, and the Tagalog language, and I mean the different dialects. There's so many different dialects but Tagalog being like the official language of the Philippines, it is the reason why we say open the light and close the light, because you say buksan mo ang ilaw, and that means to open, like you open the light. And so that's why like Filipinos say open the light, because when they say Tagalog, they say buksan, and buksan or that means to open. And so I was like, that's like brilliant. Like Tagalog is such a beautiful language. It's like non-gender, like, when you talk about nephews and nieces, you're saying pamangkin. You're talking about brothers and sisters, you say kapatid. There's like no like male, female, and it's all gender neutral. It's really incredible. So as I'm learning the language, it makes me have such a greater appreciation for anyone, like child or adult, who's like learning something new. But it's been a few months of talking to my sister-in-law. When the pandemic started, we were doing Zooms. We would do Tagalog lessons. So I have in my phone, it says Tagalog lesson, and for an hour she would talk to me in Tagalog, and I'm like, Hindi ko alam. Hindi ko alam.
Hindi ko alam.
And ano sabihin? And then, you know, she'll tell me, she'll say it in English, but just there was a point like a couple weeks ago where I was like, oh my God, I'm understanding Tagalog.
Yeah.
I'm like speaking it. And so anyway, I just want to say that if you can learn it, find a Filipino relative who will take the time to teach it to you. It's an amazing language. It's so, it's just like, and what it survived, like all of these centuries, like, you know, with Spain and like the United States and Japan and just like all of the things that like Filipinos have gone through, and the way that it's survived. It's really incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, my own like trying to figure out the language and to speak the language was you know, around these I was like researching some songs, and I found a Filipino song that I wanted to include was Loron Sinta, and so I had my dad like like I sang it to my dad. Yes. The light. So I said, Dad, I'm gonna sing this. Tell me how it sounds, right? So I did my best. Like, I thought I was rocking it. And then when I was done, I go, what do you think? He goes, it's okay. I mean, you have an accent, but that's understandable.
You have an accent.
And I was just, like deflated. And I tried so
My sister-in-law says that to me all the time. She's like, you have an accent. So
it sounds good to me. That's why I didn't even ask you, because I just assumed you spoke it.
Yeah, no, I thought I was so proud of myself because when I went to the Philippines when I was 18. That was the first time that I had been there, and I haven't been back since. But I had really I had practiced, and I knew enough conversationally. I knew enough Tagalog conversationally where I could get by, I could barter at the market, I could get what I wanted. And so I thought I was all right, but then kids are just, they're rough, man. We were in the city and stuff, and then we went to my mom's town, and so then I had younger kids, cousins and stuff. And I remember I was talking to them one time and I was trying to tell them something, and I forgot what I was saying, but they repeated it back to me. I was telling them trying to tell them something in Tagalog. They repeated it back to me with the thickest American accent. They're like, I know. They're like, you're like, alarm. And I was like, I don't sound like that, guys. They're like,
oh my God.
You know, when I went, I was in 9th grade. So this was 1992, 1991. I literally got off the plane and everybody just looked at me. I don't know if it's just the way I was walking or how I was dressed, but they were like, you're not from here. You look like you're from here, but you're not from here. I was just like, oh my God, I feel so it's like I stick out there, I stick out here. Where do I not stick out?
you don't, the only place you don't stick out is when you're in a different country and you meet Filipinos in a different country. I was traveling through Greece and London, and every time we needed, it was just me and my husband, and every time we needed someone to take a picture of us, I'd be like, hold on, look for the aunties, find the, and we play this game where he and I would listen, and we'd listen to the tourists, and he's like, I hear titas.
Oh my God.
And then we'd be I go to them and be like, can you take a picture? And oh, instantly they know you're Filipino. Oh, of course. Take a picture for us. Take a picture for us. And so we'll take pictures for them. It's great. It's a great time.
Yeah.
So that's where.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah. So I'll keep that in mind whenever we do get to travel again.
I know.
Yeah. I don't know. But we laugh about it, and we laugh about these common, experiences that we all have, but they're all aspects of survival. These are just things that we're using to survive. And it's nice that we can find the commonality and we can laugh about it. I don't know if that's part of our. I don't know, it's a part of our reclaiming our identity, acknowledging our identity, I don't know what that is, or to go down deeper into to rabbit hole about that, but yeah, it's nice to be able to talk to people that, for me, that have had these experiences, and I've had these experiences, but we've had them so separately, and I'd always felt so isolated in my experience.
Yeah.
I felt like I was the only one doing it, and then when I find other Filipinos, it's just what is this world that I am just now kind of understanding and becoming privy to? And there's a sadness attached to it. Like there's all this time that I have lost and, not having this kind of connections. There's an excitement now, There's also a little sense of imposter syndrome that I get sometimes, because I feel like, am I, like, harkening back to, like, I don't belong here, I don't belong there. It's like I'm going deep dive into my Filipino heritage, but it's like, I'm not Filipino. Do I have a right to say I can claim these things? Because I never grew up with them around me, So I feel very much like a foreigner in that respect too.
Well, I grew up with it around me, but I still have the imposter syndrome, and like I've been in spaces where there's like, my Filipino aunties, and they're like, you don't speak Tagalog, how come? Or like, you see somebody who's, why didn't you learn? And then, I think about my parents and why they didn't teach me Tagalog. I mean, they wanted me to assimilate. They wanted me, my brother and my sister and I, to not be discriminated against, and to be seen as Americans, and to be heard, and to be heard as Americans, and not have an accent. And even in schools, like there was, just this, Kassey had mentioned colorism, and how, within a particular ethnic group, like there is racism. And in the Philippines, or just amongst the Filipino community, there is like this, like, you're Americanized or you're a fob, and, or, fresh off the boat. Yeah. And it was really derogatory to like be, or not derogatory, but like, it wasn't, you had a higher status, you had higher positionality if you were Americanized. And I think that's where my parents were coming from. Like they were just like, we don't want you to be discriminated against. We want you to be as American as possible. That's why we came here. And just being, as you're socializing as a child, as a teenager, and like, oh, are you dating a Filipino? Oh, is he a fob, or is he not? Or, it was really, and that's sort of like what I grew up with in the Filipino community as well. It was, and like unlearning that, and then realizing, okay, well, I'm not as Filipino, I'm very Americanized. So I feel like I don't have as much of my identity because of the way my parents, decided to not teach me Tagalog, or teach me, or take me to and we had gone to the Philippines often. We went every few years until I was about 15. And it's, that imposter syndrome, it's, I feel like, if you are transplanted here, like from another country, your family immigrated, like you're gonna have imposter syndrome, like being just existing if you're a person of color.
Right. And it's so funny because we've been talking about like being an American, being Americanized, being as close to American, but the truth of the matter is, like, we've been here 400 years, and we're still struggling for that. But it's because we're not white. We will never be American because we look like this. Like there's other cases of different ethnic groups, different cultures who have been assimilated into whiteness, but that's because they could become that, right? And so this whole idea of colorism, I don't know how often you were told, like, don't go out in the sun, like stay inside so that you don't get dark. Time. To elude that, or to say that darkness is bad, like the darker your skin is, like that kind of thing. And then there's a whole anti-blackness within, the Asian anti-blackness that we are all trying to kind of interrogate, grapple with, dismantle, and come to terms with. That's just all part of this stuff that's just been kind of, we've been living in for a long time, but has just really kind of been emphasized the past year, so I don't know. I know, Czarina, you do a lot of work with that, or you talk a lot about that too, the model minority myth and all that kind of stuff, and how that anti-blackness and that kind of interact with one another. I don't know, I'm putting you on the spot, so we can cut it out, but do you think, like, for the people who maybe don't understand that, or haven't had any kind of like primer in that kind of model minority myth and anti-blackness, could you like maybe sum it up for us a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, especially thinking about Filipinos, I think it's especially tough for Filipinos to unpack. Like realizing that the next big wave of Filipino immigrants came in the 80s. So that was after the civil rights movement, and because of the civil rights movement, like one of the main reasons that there's like that big influx of Asian immigrants. But they missed out on all of that. Like my family missed out on all of that, experiencing all of that history because we hadn't emigrated yet. But essentially, it was during the civil rights movement. I think it was 1960, like 68, 63. Yeah, 68. But there was like, you know, alongside the, like, you know, the movement for civil rights, there was uprisings within like different colleges and things like that. And so up in the Bay, you know, that's where the term Asian American originated. There are students who, you know, wanted to create essentially a political presence for themselves. And so they banded together, Asian students, and came up with the term Asian American. And it was very a radical term when it first started.
The term Asian American was first coined by Yuji Ichioka and Emma G. in 1968 as they were seeking a name for their student organization at UC Berkeley. They settled on the name Asian American Political Alliance, and it's believed this is the first time that term was used.
You know, generations like after the World War II, and that there was a white, I guess he was an anthropologist, whatever, academic, we'll call him, a white academic who was watching, paying attention to minorities. I'm using his language. And, you know, he saw that Japanese Americans were now like coming out, like generations coming out of their time in these concentration camps, and now they're thriving again, you know, being really smart, educated, making businesses, whatever. Look at them, they're the model minority. And if you go back and read, you can find PDFs of this. He actually was very, very specific in pedestaling Japanese Americans and simultaneously talking about other minoritized groups, naming them and saying that they don't measure up. And for him to be putting out this sort of like, you know, very popular article, and it wasn't in a journal, it was in New York Times Magazine at the very same time, at the height of the civil rights movement, is something that we can't ignore. Like, we talk about, you know, the media presence today. It's not just today, it's been for the entire time that media has been going on. And because of that, there was this giant like upsurge of like, oh my goodness, look at, and that concept of model minority went from initially like where he was writing about Japanese Americans, started to kind of umbrella into a term for all Asians, whatever reason. And so to, you know, for me growing up as someone who was part of like the Filipino majority at my school, I didn't realize that there was this, you know, I didn't know there was a model minority. And when I thought of model minority, I thought of Chinese people, and I thought of East Asians, because of course within, you know, the context of Asia specifically, yeah, there is that hierarchy, there's that kind of caste system within Asia, but then also now realizing, taking a step back and years later, that because I was Filipino, I still, to my teachers, fell under that umbrella of model minority. And so for me as a student, the way that affected me was that I ended up striving for things that I had no business being a part of, like trying to keep up with like my friends who, you know, also Filipino girls, but incredible academics, right? And I was just trying so hard to keep up with them because I thought that's where I was supposed to be. Like, let me take all the honors classes with you. Okay, I'm gonna take chemistry. I don't need it to graduate, but let me fail it twice. And so like things like that, and then feeling like when I'm struggling with something, not that it's hard, but I'm a failure, like, you know, innately a failure, because there's this expectation set for me that I just can't reach. And then also because I'm this model minority, my teachers not giving me the help and the attention that I needed as a struggling student, because they thought, oh, she's fine.
She's fine.
She's one of the smart Asian girls. We don't need to check on her. She's all right. And so, of course, then, that's my experience, but then that lived experience manifests in different ways. And more often than not, within the Asian community, it manifests itself in, mental health struggles with, depression and anxiety. Then the tough part is, without realizing that the model minority myth is rooted in anti-Blackness, then our family members who come over without understanding the history of it see it as something to grasp onto, and then continues to perpetuate what it was created for, which is to divide and conquer, because that is always the goal of a colonizer, is to divide and to conquer. And so we then perpetuate that idea of, we're the model minority, and then everyone else, mainly Black and Latinx people, they're beneath us because of X, Y, and Z.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, just kind of going back into the history of things and realizing that there is a deep-seated Filipino activist, like, part of being, a Filipino in America, like with the labor movement in California and all that. Like, there's an aspect that there was Filipinos that were deeply involved in that, and still are, and that just isn't ever talked about. Well, that whole labor movement isn't really taught about at all where I was, but the idea that there are Filipinos involved in that too, and that activism and stuff is part of our kind of our background and our history. It's very interesting to find out for me. And my dad, again, like you said, you have people who come over and then they bring that kind of stuff with them as well. And I love my parents. Let me just say that. But he picked up America is in the Heart, the Carlos Bulasan novel, and not knowing what it was, I don't think. And he just started flipping through it, and he's like, "This is good." I'm like, "You should read it, Dad." So he has my copy, and I think he's making his way through it. But it's just like things that we aren't taught, or we are just kind of like pushed off to the side. We lose that to history, and it's kind of a bummer,
I didn't learn about Larry Itliong until I was an adult. And the fact that he was like close to Cesar Chavez, and I see, like, at San Jose State we have this wonderful mural structure that has like Cesar Chavez and Gandhi on there, and like I was like, that would be so cool if Larry Itliong was on there. He's sort of instrumental in that whole labor movement at that time, and I don't understand, but okay.
Yeah.
So yeah. That erasure.
Larry Itliong was instrumental in the 1960s and 70s during the farm workers movement. His organization, called the Agriculture Workers Organizing Committee, combined forces with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta's organization called the National Farm Workers Association, and conducted a strike, a walkout, a boycott, demanding higher wages and better work conditions. Larry Itliong knew that this would only be possible if the Filipino farm workers and the Mexican farm workers combined forces. And at that time, at the very beginning of the movement, Cesar Chavez was not entirely convinced that the Mexican farm workers were ready to strike. But through convincing, they decided to combine forces, created the United Farm Workers, one of the largest, most powerful unions in the past century, and they walked out. This is known as the Delano Grape Strike. It started in 1965, and it lasted for 5 years. During these 5 years, Chavez is probably what we reference most during this time. That's our reference point. We know his work in that, if we do know this history. But what has been lost to history is Larry Itliong's contribution to this. I mean, he started the thing. He was the one who convinced Chavez and Huerta to join forces. And without that, this would not have happened. 5 years later, when the strike ended, the workers were given higher wages, were given opportunities for medical insurance, and also had their work environment made much safer through the regulation of toxic pesticides that were being used in the fields while they worked. This is important to Filipinos and Filipino Americans because through this erasure of our history and not knowing this, we we lose this part of representation in our history in the United States. We don't know that these people existed, that we are a part of a larger movement, and we have been standing up for ourselves and having people listen to us when we speak, and it's important for Filipinos and Filipino Americans to know that and to embrace that. And I don't want us to get too deep into the struggle, because this is always part of it. We have to acknowledge the struggle too, but part of being Filipino and the Filipino History Month is joy as well, like just being proud and embracing our identities. And so I kind of wanted to ask some other questions too about like is there anything that you're just kind of like really digging about the Philippines and your Filipino-ness right now that's just like giving you life, and you're just like, yes?
The food. It's so funny. Like, it's what?
What's your favorite?
Oh my god. Right now it's oh my god, what is it called? The one with the no, it's not pinakbet. I get a mix. Pinakbet and then kare. That one. That's my favorite right now. I just learned how to make it recently, and it's funny because like my mom made that growing up while I was growing up all the time, and I never liked it at first, and then now like being able to like go back to it and make it my own, it's like, oh, this is good. And then going back to have my mom's stuff, it's like, oh, this is good. Well, okay, but like it's tied to like when you were talking about otherness, Lorelai, that first time you felt that otherness, like, it reminded me of that time when my mom would make me Filipino food, like for baon, for lunch, right? And then I would bring it to school, and immediately like, ew, that's gross. Like I get from from my like white like classmates, and I was just like, okay. And so there was like a shame in that, but like now, like cooking is like my escape. It's like my way of like really like just like making good things, and like it used to be my way of bringing people together, but it's now hard to do that. But like learning how to make lumpia on my own, learning how to make sinigang, like all of these things, like it's really wonderful. And also like validating how complex these dishes can be, even though like a lot of people like don't think that they are. Like it's nice reclaiming that.
Food is good.
It is great.
And there's nothing as good as like your mom or your dad's cooking, it's just like I don't know, it's that ratatouille thing, where you take and you get transported back to your childhood, and it's like it's rooted in that, the food is good, but it's also attached to memories, I think, for me. And
I had a friend ask me one time, like, why don't you take me to a Filipino restaurant? Like, why aren't there Filipino restaurants? And I was like, there are. We have parents.
Yeah.
We have grandmas. Like, why? Why go to a restaurant? Go home.
Yep. And they feed you too. Like, it was not a meal unless there was like 4 different kinds of meats, and they're all from different animals, and just like
you can't leave until you eat either. They don't let you leave. So
nope.
You have to eat something.
No. Don't.
Yeah, food is definitely a love language. Yeah. There's a song that I'm just kind of like digging on. Oh, and it's an older song too. It's been around, but like I found it, and then it's like it has been my my alarm every morning. I wake up to it. It's Us by Ruby Ibarra.
Yes, we love Ruby Ibarra.
Oh my gosh, I heard it. I was like, where has this been all my life? And then the spoken word part at the end, like it makes me cry every single time. It makes me cry every single time. And she says, "Whenever you're ready, sis, we're here." I'm like, I'm here. Like I want to scream into my phone as I'm watching the video. So that's been giving me life. And some books. I've been picking up some books. I found, and this is funny, this book right here, it's America is Not the Heart. Do you have it too?
I haven't read it yet, but yeah, I have it in a different cover.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I just started it today. So, a take on Carlos Busan's novel, so I'm interested in seeing what's going on with that. So, I don't know. Tiffany, is there anything about Philippines, Filipino, or is it just like this?
Yeah. Well, I am working on a book on Filipino folk songs, and that has been my.
Oh my gosh! What?
We need that.
Yes. So badly.
Yes.
That is dominating my life right now. So, and it's in layout. It's called Songs of the Sun, Filipino folk songs for the musical classroom, and it will be coming out. Oh gosh, I don't know. It's being published by Beaten Path Publications.
Okay, Cool.
And I'm working with Brent Hall, who right now to get everything, and it's all laid out. And every time, you know, I was supposed to go to the Philippines in June to do more research and to like meet with like some music educators there. And my cousin was going to take me to like different provinces, and then COVID hit, and then like, well, I don't know if we can do this still. And
yeah,
Brent and Amy, my editors, they were like, we're going to do it still. Like, it's going to happen. So we'll do it. We'll get going what you've got. And that has been like a labor of love. And, you know, I mean, you've written a book, Lorelei, and it's sort of like,
no, I'm like, yes.
Ukulele book.
Oh, it's the one I mean, it's a book.
But that whole process is just like it eats you alive. It's that, but it's also like it's that, you know, like it's like birthing a baby. It's like
it is for
for
3 years, like you're an elephant. Yeah. It
just comes out of you, and you're like, is this really gonna happen? Is this? So as it gets closer, it's becoming real, but it's also there's a lot of love and just struggle that has gone into it, and that has sort of been dominating my life in a very good way. So
yeah, it's so needed. Oh, I'm so excited. We'll have to make sure to like really, hey everybody, get this.
I think about every Filipino in the United States, in any country where they just don't feel like they belong, and like we totally belong. So
I love that so much. I think the final question I want to ask you guys is can we talk a little bit about karaoke, and do you guys have a karaoke song?
I do.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. We didn't hear from Czarina about what gives Czarina life. We didn't hear from Czarina.
Oh,
did we get Czarina?
Honestly, this like this conversation, all of it, like our generation of Filipinos claiming what it is, like what it is to them to be Filipino, and wherever they are, like Filipino-American, Filipino-Canadian, Indigenous Filipino, like, and that's something, you know, that I've just loved learning and like listening to, and just for me that is so exciting. So our conversation, for example.
Before we go on to the next topic, can I just add one more thing? Like,
sure.
I'm learning a lot. I'm taking this class called Finding Your Filipino Voice. It's taught by this soprano. Her name is Danica Fernandez in New York, and I'm learning about like the musical history of the Philippines, like everything from like the indigenous music to like to kundiman, to like then there's like musicals out there and operas apparently. Like I didn't know this, and I didn't know that there were like José Rizal like wrote a poem that was then put to music and then like is now like an art song. Like what? But then also learning that kundiman is like, it's secretly, even though it's like really like angsty, like I love you, like music, you know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, I have this love for you. It's actually like secretly like protest music, and like finding and like learning about that, right? Learning that it's like really like it's actually like, yeah, it's about love, but it's actually like we're loving like Philippine independence, and we want to be like
like a yearning for freedom.
Exactly. And just learning about that has been really interesting too.
That is, you're gonna have to send us like what this class is and who.
Oh my god, yes. I'll just like drop Danica's email with y'all. It's her mission too to like get us all connected too, and like get that like just, you know, like reclaim our culture and really tell the story the way we should be telling it, right?
Love that. Yeah. Oh yeah, side note. So random resource. I think it's ICAT Voices, but that's a Filipino wanting to amplify them. So they're an indigenous Filipino group of peeps. So IKAT on Instagram, ICAT Voices. And so for me, that's something that I've been learning about tons too, because it's just like, as much as I did not know about Filipino activism here in the States, I know nothing about indigenous Philippine culture. And so for me, that's really cool to just like sit and like listen from them.
Yeah,
my own plug. Anyways, all right.
All right, Tiffany, what's your karaoke song?
My karaoke song is Oh, I have a few, but I'm gonna say
you can give us some. You can give us a smattering.
Total Eclipse of the Heart.
Oh wait, it's mine.
Yeah, I'm gonna say another one. Can't Take My Eyes Off of You.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a Lea Salonga one.
Well, of course.
Yes. Shoot, I'm like the name is escaping me. Nandito Ako.
That's my go-to Tagalog one too.
She is so just a queen. Like her
Yeah.
diction is
Even
so
now,
unbelievably clear. Like what is going on?
Amazing.
She it does not age. She's like,
Yes.
amazing too.
She's-
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that
is-
was ever a thing. Like, I felt like there was pressure to be her growing up. Like, if you had any inkling of musical ability,
it.
like, oh, you're gonna be Leah. You're like, no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Kassey, what's yours?
What is it? Oh my gosh. I just had it in my head and it disappeared. Sorry. How does it go? Oh my gosh. I've sung this so many times too. I wanna know if he really loves me.
Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
Whitney Houston, there we go. Because,
How
like,
will I know? How will I know?
How will I
yeah,
know?
right. Like
Uh-huh.
it fit
That's the one.
just the right part of my range where it's like
Yeah.
I don't have to go like, how do I know?
Just change the key. You just
Yeah, I
go
know.
up. Oh,
I know,
wait.
right? I probably should. But like, I really love that one because like it's also like my queer heart like speaking out to be like, how will he know?
Yeah.
You know, like
I love that.
like I don't. I'm like also not reclaiming. Sorry, that's not something I reclaim. But like that's like
Yeah.
like using that as a way
Yeah.
to be like,
Mhm.
you know, like here's my queerness too, right? Like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
It's affirming.
Yeah.
Right. I also like I haven't done this in karaoke yet, but I definitely want to do like Dahil Sa'yo. I'm just learning about that song, and like there's this really cool choral piece that I learned about recently that I like would love to do with a choir someday. But also like it's such a lovely song, and there's such an interesting history that like even Nat King Cole like did a rendition of it at one point. Like yeah,
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Love
Cool.
it. Yeah. Czarina, what's yours?
Okay, so nandito ako, and I was singing in English. I think it's Somebody to Love by Queen.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
yeah. That's a good one.
That one.
That's a good
Like
one.
stomping around and singing it.
Yeah.
And then I Want to Dance with Somebody by Whitney Houston.
Mhm.
And since we were talking about Leia, you know I'm always down to duet A Holy World anytime. Let me know when.
Love it. Yes. I mean, some On My Own is you know.
Oh
classic
yeah.
too.
That's in the
Yeah. I like to call that the brown girl song of Les Mis because it seems like that's the song that
Reflection. Don't forget Reflection.
Reflection. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
that?
Well, mine, like, karaoke is I mean, I love doing karaoke, but I also understand that sometimes there's just, like, it's sometimes really bad. But I feel like there is a art to picking your song, so it depends on, like, what's going on. You have to either bring the tone up or down.
Yeah.
You know, it can't just be, this is my song. So it just depends. But, yeah, Total Eclipse is one. Anything 80s Pat Benatar, like Hit Me With Your Best Shot, I usually that's kind of in my
a good
range.
one.
Yeah, but Shoop too, you know, is also. You haven't lived until you heard me trying to attempt to rap. Yes. So yeah,
Yes.
those are mine. All right, thank you so much. This has been just so like lovely and replenishing and rejuvenating and just talking with you all and hearing your experiences and hopefully our audience will be able to watch this and understand a little bit more just our positionality and our we're here, representation, Filipino Americans, teaching in the classroom, all that kind of stuff, and what that brings to our society in general. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Tiffany's book.
Oh yes, I did think so.
Yes.